Thanks for that, John, and welcome to everybody who's on the webinar today. Commitment and engagement, they're often interchanged, but commitment actually comes first and then engagement. And there are three ways in which an employee can commit to an organisation. One is a legal commitment that obliges the person to stay. An example is signing a training contract. Second is a need to work because they've got bills to pay. They turn up to work, they do the work, they go home. Their attendance doesn't always mean that they're going to do their best. And the third type of commitment is the one we're looking for. It's affective or emotional commitment. The person wants to turn up to work. They're emotionally committed. Positive leadership and management can actually foster this and foster that commitment. And this is the most valuable type of commitment that we can get, and it's one that's easily lost by poor management. Engagement follows commitment and occurs when the person and the job are meshed. That means the individual is closely integrated with the job. They turn up for work, they excel, they lose track of time, they're totally absorbed in their job, and motivation and performance are at the highest when this happens. Everything that you do as a manager has an impact on commitment, engagement, and on the bottom line. And you'll probably all agree that people are the most important asset of any organisation. But if you think about it, a lot of organisations focus on financial metrics such as ROI, gross profit margin, earnings before income tax, or EBIT. They seldom think about people metrics. And after this webinar, I'm hoping that you'll understand how, as a manager, you motivate your people for optimum performance. Your interactions will help or hinder commitment and engagement of others. So I want to look at some models that will help you win commitment and engagement. And in the workbook, there's space for you to jot down notes from this webinar, and also there's a reading list at the bottom of the page on webinar 2. So let's take a few minutes to think about your people. Watts and Wyatt did some research into the relationship between people management and profit made by the firm, and they have identified 5 dimensions which are shown in this slide. If these dimensions are managed effectively, the organisation will be close to what the research considers is ideal. The research shows that when combined, the dimensions will give 26% increase in shareholder value. So what do each of these attributes involve? Well, let's think about recruitment first. It's about getting the right people into the right jobs, and it's jobs that are valid and needed in the firm. Management and leadership is about integrated practices where all the needs of stakeholders are equitably managed. Management support is good and communications are good, and trust and justice are high. People know what to expect, and they see issues and unjust practices being dealt with very quickly and very fairly. We all know that pay is not a motivator, but transparency and reward for good work has a positive impact on shareholder value. Choice of benefits, flexible working, and good employer pension contributions are some examples of pay and benefits that can add value. And it makes sense to train and develop people. They'll then drive performance and organisational competitive advantage. And people do want to be developed. Generation Y in particular, they want to be trained, they want responsibility, and we should actually be harnessing this in our organisations. Non-focused retention. If we keep the wrong people, it has a negative impact on shareholder value. People who don't perform properly are often stuck in a corner and ignored rather than managed. Person who's on long-term sick. We've all had situations like this, and we all don't always manage them. So have a think about your organisation. Do you have people in non-jobs? Perhaps someone who's been recruited without enough thought? If you do, then you need to take some action. You're unlikely to get effective commitment, and you certainly won't get engagement from them. Human capital is about the collective capability, knowledge and skills of people employed in the organisation. And it's about managing these assets effectively. The commitment and engagement of people is determined by the organisation's practices, and as a manager, you have an impact. If you want to check out your firm's human capital index, you can do this using our free health check tool on the tools tab of our website. University of Bath have done some research. A chap called Purcell did this, and they took the Watson Wyatt work a stage further and identified 11 key people management practices that are linked to performance. These can be mapped to the 5 dimensions we've already discussed, and some of these practices, such as job challenge and job autonomy, are directly linked to job engagement. Purcell developed the Bath model to help understand how management practices impact commitment and engagement, and using employee satisfaction as a key driver, he formed an integrated model linking ability, motivation, and opportunity to performance outcomes. The 11 practices are enablers or influencers of AMO. That's the ability, motivation, and opportunity. And it's often referred to as FAMO, so you may have heard it in that context. AMO leads to commitment, engagement, and job satisfaction. And how an employee chooses to behave will impact on their level of commitment and engagement. These discretionary behaviours lead to the performance outcome, and hopefully the behaviours that they exhibit will lead to high performance. So let's think about 2 scenarios. In scenario 1, the employee has high ability. They have the skills and knowledge needed. They're motivated by the job. The job excites them. They see that there are great career opportunities. They display positive discretionary behaviours. They go that extra mile. They take responsibility. They volunteer for projects that will extend their learning and experience. They're engaged. Their performance outcomes are high, and they meet or exceed manager expectations. In scenario 2, the employee has ability. They also have the skills and knowledge needed. But their job is not challenging, so they're frustrated. They don't see any opportunities for advancement. They come in, do their work, go home. They don't take on any new challenges. They simply do their job and earn their money. They're committed, they turn up, but effective commitment is low, and their performance outcome is therefore low. AMO needs to be in balance. You can't afford to ignore how you manage and motivate people. If any AMO score is 0, then the whole score is 0. And this is because it's A times M times O. Ability, motivation, and opportunity must all be managed effectively to gain the engagement that we crave from the employees. The process is critical for this Bath model to work, and the model emphasises the role of a line manager in implementing, enacting, leading, and controlling. So as managers, how do we achieve this and get the high level of performance outcome that we want? How do we ensure employees understand the performance required of them, and that we as managers understand how to motivate and engage them? Well, we use a process, and one tool we have is feedback. You'll find the full model of this on the front sheet of the workbook. So let's have a look at how we use this model to give feedback to a salesperson. We know the job role accountabilities from the job description and the annual objectives, and this is where a good job description becomes important. We know what knowledge, skills, and abilities are required for the role, and we also know what knowledge, skills, and abilities the salesperson has. In the triangular box, we review the performance of the salesperson against that required. They either meet the requirements, the plus, or they don't meet the requirements, the negative, the minus sign. So, for example, they'll meet sales targets, they report accurately and on time. So these are all things that we will factor in when we're reviewing and appraising. So the performance is either acceptable or not acceptable. Having made that decision, an intervention is then put in place to discuss the findings of the review, and this may be a formal appraisal or performance improvement meeting or an informal meeting over a cup of coffee. These interventions happen all the time, and they can be ad hoc, they can be a chat by a coffee machine or a phone call to catch up. Following the intervention, some course of action will be decided. It might be training, it might be new objectives, or some other action. Again, we see the managers instrumental in facilitating commitment and engagement. The way the manager handles these interactions impacts the effective commitment of the person. It also influences engagement. And this model is not just reserved for formal appraisals, it's a tool that you can use on a daily basis. CIPD have identified 3 aspects to engagement. First is intellectual engagement. How can I do my job better? Secondly is effective engagement, feeling really positive about doing a good job. And the third is social engagement, where the individual is very happy and wants to discuss and improve their own performance and talk with others at work about it. Well-managed feedback has a really positive impact. Effective management also has a positive impact. How we interact with others is really important, and it's referred to as social exchange. So social exchange, it's all about exchanging things of value, and it could be a smile, it could be a thank you, or a well done. It's subtle. Social exchange is really subtle, and it's powerful in influencing motivation and behaviour. Think about being invited to dinner by someone. When you do, there's an obligation to invite them back. There's nothing written down to say that you have to do this, but there's that expectation. Timeless Time's giving you free level 7 manager training. That allows us to send you a newsletter with further helpful advice. We hope that in return you'll consider us when you next need some support with HR, people management, projects and problems. We also hope that you'll tell others about us. There's no guarantee, but we hope to influence you to have a positive view of Timeless Time. That's social exchange. So back to seeking commitment and engagement. The interaction that gets a positive approval from someone is more likely to be repeated than an interaction that elicits disapproval. But we do need to give negative feedback to our team, and we should do this in a positive way. If we can do that, then we're more likely to create positive discretionary behaviours. What's done in the feedback intervention box in the feedback model and how it's done is really important. And remember that you can use this tool at any time. It's not just reserved for performance appraisals. So let's think about employee engagement now. So employee engagement, it's a key business driver for organisational success. High job engagement leads to retention of talent and then on to customer loyalty, improved organisational performance and increased stakeholder value. It's important to have a culture of engagement. And there are 6 antecedents to employment engagement, and these are listed in your workbook. Job characteristics, that's about the complexity of the role, the challenge, the variety, the personal discretion that somebody has, the autonomy, the opportunity to make contributions. Perceived organisational and perceived supervisor support, this is about the belief held by the employee about how much the organisation values their contribution and manages their well-being. And this is where social exchange theory comes in. Employees with challenging jobs that enrich them and make them feel important will respond with a higher level of engagement. Appropriate recognition and reward leads to engagement, and it's not all about pay. Remember that it includes simple recognition, sometimes just a thank you. Procedural justice is the transparency and fairness of practices and procedures across the organisation, and distributive justice is about using these practices in a constant manner, again across the whole organisation. And these antecedents can be mapped back to the Wyatt attributes and the Bath model practices that we covered earlier. And as managers, there are 3 things that we can do, which are quite simple, that can have a positive effect on engagement. We can involve staff in business change and improvements. We can ensure that people know what's going on in the business. We can celebrate all the positivity and the positives of the business, and we can explain the negatives rather than hiding them away. And we can lead by example. Managers' own actions should show that they care about the organisation, and that will then impact on the individuals in their own teams. And there are several positive outcomes of good engagement. The positive emotional state resulting from the job satisfaction, that improves. Organisational commitment, which is part of the affective commitment, and the attitude and attachment to the firm is higher. Intention to quit, so people deciding that actually they've got a reason to leave, that's really drastically reduced. And engaged people don't tend to quit. And organisational citizenship behaviour is higher. So this is where people will help other people and take on voluntary roles that perhaps they've not been asked to get involved with. One of the roles of managers is to review performance of staff, and another is to gain commitment and engagement such that the employee performs well. The only way to know if a person is delivering is to measure them, and key performance indicators help us do this, but they should be quantifiable, measurable, and actionable. A word of warning: be sure to measure factors that are relevant. For example, telling a child to clear their plate before they get pudding, it's fine, but when they go and put the contents of their plate in the bin, that's job done. It's not quite what you had in mind, but they did what they were asked. Another example is telling the production line to fabricate metal sheets with drill holes in specific places. They're paid per sheet accurately drilled. They accurately drill the sheets, but the sheets are pitted with swarf and they're unusable. KPIs should be linked to business goals and targets, and they should be clear. And there are three types of indicators that get used in KPIs. There's first one is financial and marketing, which looks at things like revenue, profits, and market value. Second is strategic outcomes, which is looking at productivity, quality, customer satisfaction. And the third is behavioural engagement, things like organisational citizenship, discretionary behaviours, resilience, and innovation. And this is the one that tends to get forgotten, but this is the one that can help us understand the commitment and engagement. So this session has been about winning staff commitment and job engagement. We've talked about how ammo can affect performance outcomes, and we've talked about feedback and about providing objectives that are appropriate and that can be measured. How do we ensure that we have the right people in the organisation? The people who are going to be more likely to display effective commitment and then be fully engaged. If people are in the wrong job, then they'll not be motivated or engaged. Back to ammo. Performance outcomes will be affected, and then their commitment will also be affected and they'll not be engaged. If people don't perform at the right level we want from them, then we can use the feedback model to help determine what action we need to take to actually drive that performance and that engagement. If KPIs are inappropriate or ill-defined, then performance outcomes won't be what we expect. And it's the selection process that's a starting point for us to get that impact on staff development and job engagement. We need to make sure that the job description has accountabilities that are relevant and measurable, and that the job description is not just a list of duties. We should be sure that the person's specification informs on relevant criteria for the role. And we need to assess candidates against defined criteria using all the tools available to us. We need to ensure that the predictive validity is as high as possible, and we can use tools such as work sample testing, psychometrics, structured interview. They all increase predictive validity and the likelihood of those who are going to be highly engaged. They all inform the selection process and help us ensure that the best person is appointed to the role. How to recruit and select, that's a discussion for a different webinar, but we really do need to understand that it's part and parcel of getting that commitment and engagement. And selection's a science, and you can predict who'll do best in the role that you're recruiting to, and that goes for external hires as well as those that you're promoting to new roles internally. So you get the right person in the right role, effectively manage them, and use the correct interventions, and you're more likely to get commitment, and then that all-important engagement, which is what we're all driving for organisational success. So that wraps up this webinar, and I hope that you've identified some tools there that you can take away and implement. And I'm going to hand back to John to see if there are any questions.